giving you the insider takes and the big picture view on the Dogs. This is On the Beat, presented by Ingles, with DawgNation insider Mike Griffith and Cody Chapins.
DawgNation, welcome into On the Beat, presented by Ingles. I am not Cody Chapins. I am actually Kaylee Mansell with Mike Griffith. Second week in a row getting to spend some time with Mike. I'm feeling very privileged. We spent a lot of last week talking about basketball. It's kind of a put your money where your mouth is thing. How are your brackets looking so far?
I mean, they're looking pretty good. I got 13 out of the 16 teams from in the Sweet 16. I guess I went a little SEC heavy, albeit I did not have Ole Miss in there. Guess I should have known the Rebels would get it done. But, 7 out of 16 teams are from the SEC. And, the seedings have been pretty good, unless you consider Arkansas as a 10 seed. I mean, that's a bit of a Cinderella, I guess. But for the most part, a lot of chalk out there.
Definitely the closest thing that we've had to a Cinderella this far in Arkansas. But looking at that bracket draw, they may have gotten the best one out of the lower-seeded SEC teams. We have got a jam-packed show today, including a very, very special guest. Later on in the show, we are going to bring on the Georgia basketball coach, Mike White, who's going to explain how everything went down this past week and what does Georgia basketball look like moving forward. We'll get to that later, as well as have a follow-up on other Georgia sports, like the Georgia baseball team who swept those lousy, stinking Gators this weekend. More on that. We're going to get started with football talk. And real quick, off the top, minor announcement. We had some breaking news about 45 minutes before we tape this, and that is that the 5-star quarterback prospect, Jared Curtis, is going to make his decision on May 5th. It's between Georgia and Oregon. He has taken unofficial visits to both, and we now know that decision is coming from him soon. So more coverage on that. And Jared Curtis is one of those players that a lot of Georgia fans don't necessarily want Georgia to miss on this one, but that's okay. There are more options. Something that Georgia can't miss on this year is having a quarterback that is consistent and elevates the players around him. It's a can't miss position for the Dogs this year, but Mike, which one can't miss? Is it Gunnar Stockton? Is it Ryan Puglisi? Where do things stand in that room?
Or a player to be named later. I mean, obviously Gunnar has gone into spring at number 1, and I think Puglisi throws the ball around. Everybody talks about his arm strength. I don't know that he knows the offense as well as Gunnar yet. I mean, that's kind of what these spring drills are for and what the off season's for, and now he'll be getting more reps with the ones. It is a competition, albeit I think right now we would say Gunnar would probably be the guy considered ahead. But, ultimately Kaylee is one of these two guys the quarterback of the future, and I don't know that you can really answer that until the end of the second portal window. Kirby Smart is the guy that's constantly going out looking for better talent at every position, and we talked to Gunnar about that in New Orleans the last time that we had access to him. He's like, yeah, this is Georgia. Like, everybody's going to fight for their job. The best are supposed to want to come here. But to your point about next season, and again, there's a lot of room for these guys to develop and improve. But as you look at Georgia on paper, you'd be hard pressed to find a first round lock. Mm-hmm. You'd be hard pressed to find a first team preseason selection on offense. So, being a good distributor or caretaker or game manager, I don't know that that's enough. I mean, we kind of saw that a little bit against Notre Dame when there was an early turnover. I mean, it almost seems like now when you look across the SEC landscape at the great programs, you got quarterbacks that can elevate not only the players around them, but they can elevate their play. I think about guys like Lenore Sellers. I think of DJ Lagway. And I think Arch Manning. He came in and got a first down before Georgia knocked the snot out of him, knocked the ball loose. I imagine Arch will probably have a little better ball security next year. But you look at these players, and they are true dual threats, or they possess the NFL arm. And Gunnar, while still in development, he's 3 years in now. And how much of a jump is realistic to expect him to make? And then on the part of the mobility, I don't know if I'd want anybody else next to me in a foxhole, but I don't know how many more hits he can take, like the one in the Texas game. I mean, part of Gunnar's mobility, he takes some pretty good shots, and I don't know if it's realistic to think that this is a guy that can carry the ball, 60 or 70 times during the regular season in the SEC and make it to the finish line. So there's a lot of questions about the position, about how the offense will be set up. We're still waiting to learn a little bit more about those receivers. But to your point, I totally agree. I think that one of the positions that has to come through is quarterback, and I think we either need to see elevated play from Gunnar that we've yet to see, or a new guy under center to win a championship.
Well, the guys that we're mostly going to be talking about in this segment are specific guys, but the one position group that we can both agree on is the quarterback room. And I think that you bring up an excellent point about these SEC programs where it looks like the future is bright for them is because we can acknowledge that they have a good quarterback at the forefront. I thought DJ Lagway was a great example. I also think about somebody like Garrett Nussmeier from LSU who came back, and now everybody's really high on LSU because they are confident in what Garrett Nussmeier brings to the table. Even though we got the chance to see Gunnar in 1.5 games, we still know very little about can he make that long stretch of games, even though a lot of the tougher games are at home. Is he capable of handling the pressure, and does he have the skill set necessary to make you feel good about what you have in the quarterback room versus all these other SEC programs where we're like, yeah, they're going to be good because they have a good quarterback, and we know it.
Yeah, and admittedly, he doesn't have a full resume. He was pressed into action at halftime of a game, and he came through heroically, and they won the SEC championship behind Gunnar Stockton. So make it clear, this guy has stayed dialed in. I think Jake Fromm said on DawgNation Daily a couple of years ago he was among the most studious quarterbacks he's ever been around. So he's going to know the offense. He's going to work hard. He's a great leader. His teammates love him. But it is what it is. I mean, it's a performance game. And does he have enough talent to get it done? Because I don't think. And no knock against Stetson Bennett, certainly, but he doesn't have the supporting cast that Stetson did. There's no Ladd McConkey, there's no Brock Bowers, there's no James Cook, there's no Kenny McIntosh. That offensive line, first round left tackle Broderick Miller. He doesn't have that. I don't think. I know these guys are all going to develop and get better, but as we look at this team going into next season, it's kind of a twofold thing. Georgia had 14 guys at the combine, and they're probably going to have 16 or 17 guys make NFL clubs. You say, well, yeah, but Mike, in 2022, they lost 15 guys to the NFL draft. It was a record, and they lost 13 guys in the portal, and 9 of those guys were in the 2 deep, and 4 of those guys had started some games, so they were able to replenish then. And I'll say, yeah, but NIL wasn't quite the same. I mean, it was kind of there, but not like now, where you had a lot of these guys, that would have been next up. They're first up somewhere else last season. Georgia doesn't have that championship depth, and ultimately, I think that's what took them down. So when you talk about a rebuild or a reload, what did Kirby say? Something like 33 new players in spring drill. This is the biggest reload ever, even though there was another year when they lost that many players because of the portal, and the guys that would have been clear-cut number 2s on the verge of playing at Georgia are signing NIL deals to go somewhere else. So I think that's the challenge, and I think that's what leads us to this exercise today, of picking 4 guys that can't miss. And like you said, you start out with a quarterback because, you got to have the trigger, as they say, to win a championship. I think that was proven last year. But then there's other positions, Kaylee, that you and I both, I think we agreed on most of them. Yeah,
because, as we get closer and closer to the season, you're going to hear us talk about the groups that need to break out. The offensive linemen and the wide receivers, but where it really all kind of comes back to is the quarterback room. So don't forget about that. But I do want to go to the defensive side of the ball because you look at the defensive line now and the way that college football is done. Especially in the SEC, it's so difficult at the line of scrimmage every single game. Kirby Smart constantly preaches that. But this year, you lose so many guys. Warren Brinson, Nazir Stackhouse, Ty Ingram Dawkins, Michael Williams, all gone to the next level. And then a lot of the guys that are supposed to be those next up, the Jordan Halls, the Joseph Jonah Ajanyes, were so injured last year. And so they didn't have that same level of experience that they probably should coming into the season. And because of that, it makes Christian Miller the can't-miss player of the defensive line. When you have a group that's inexperienced because of some injury and just a lot younger overall, they're going to need that guidance from a veteran more than ever, not just in the physical side of things, but as well as a leader in that room.
Yeah, no doubt. You think about it, what Georgia's losing, you got to start there again.
Yeah.
2 first-round picks and Jalen Walker and Michael Williams out of that front 7. And, and they still had dropped in, and I didn't remember the final ranking, but I remember near the end of the season, they were around 35th. in run defense. The year before they were 19th, and that was after a run of I don't know what, Kaylee, 5 or 6 years when the Dogs were 1 or 2 in the nation in run defense. That's been the biggest difference, and it affects the offense. People say, what are you talking about? You don't got the 3 and outs anymore. You don't have the field position that the championship teams had. You're not able to put your offense on the field, holding Bryce Young without a touchdown for 3 quarters like they did in the national title game. It's a different situation. The offense is playing catch up or from behind as they were in, I don't know, 7 or 8 games last year, something crazy like that. So it really does start at the line of scrimmage. And on defense for Kirby, it starts with stopping the run. And you're right, Christian Miller was a guy that was, let's call him a priority free agent re-signing, because that's what it is. Everybody's a free agent, and they targeted Christian Miller, said, this is the guy that we really need to stay. I know they went after Ty Ingram Dawkins too. That was another one. They didn't want him to leave, but there's only so much money, and players have different ideas about where they're going to go. But without question, Christian Miller, not just because of his talents and his upside. I mean, this is a guy that could be playing in the NFL next year, make no doubt about it, but the leadership, right? And the work ethic, because you need your best player to be your hardest worker or among your hardest workers. And I don't know that was necessarily always the case in the last couple seasons, but I think Christian Miller has a chance to really lead that young defensive line room. You mentioned the injuries last year. I throw Xavier McLeod in there as well. Mm-hmm. It's another guy that I thought came on at the end of the year that was injured early. And of course, Griffin, the signee, we're hearing all these great things about him, but then in the next breath, Kirby's telling us all the freshmen are out of shape. Who knows? I got a feeling he'll be in shape by the season opener, but I would agree with you that it starts with Christian Miller on defense.
Well, what it makes me think about too is Ohio State, last year's national champion. Yes, they spent however many $1 million to get the roster that they needed, but one area that they really excelled in was getting those guys who would have potentially been 3rd, 4th, 5th round picks to stay and have some of those veteran leaders and that experience on the team. So when I look at somebody like Christian Miller, that's one that Georgia got right in bringing him back, and maybe they could pay him more than he would get paid in the first rookie contract of wherever he got drafted. So it was beneficial for both parties, and Christian Miller was the right one to bring back if they were going to get one. Let's go back to the offensive side of the ball. The quarterback's obviously going to need some help. No Trevor Etienne. He's gone. Who knows what the heck is happening with the health status of the Robinsons? Until I see them on the field, I'm really not sure what's going to happen. We aren't sure who that number 2 is, but we do know who RB number 1 is, and that's Nate Frazier. Mike, I have a trivia question for you here. Do you know the one thing that happened to be in common with all 3 games that Georgia lost, the one statistic that remained in all 3 of Georgia's losses this year?
I'm going to say, I would either say turnover differential, but since we're talking about Nate Frazier, I'm going to guess there was a fumble involved.
Pipe down over there. In all 3 games that Georgia lost this year, and the only games where this occurred, Georgia rushed for less than 100 yards.
Okay.
That was the common statistic. The run game has got to be in a better position. Now, some of that blame we can place on the offensive line, who has also taken the blame in part for that. You heard Monroe Freeling speak about it last week. Nate Frazier not only has to hit, but he has to hit big for the Dogs, because right now we don't know who's going to be healthy, who's going to be behind him. We don't know if he's going to have any help, but at this point we do know that Nate Frazier is there, and he's got to help himself and help whoever the quarterback ends up being.
Yeah, and I went to ball security because that's really the only thing that holds Nate Frazier back in terms of, is he a great back? He did have some ball security issues. Obviously, Georgia just in general with the turnover margin wasn't great. And Kirby will tell you it's just as much because the defense didn't force a lot. As far as the rushing statistics, those can be a little misleading. If you're leading games, you tend to run the ball more. Again, I go back to Georgia falling behind with the defense, how it all works together, complementary. But Frazier is a home run hitter. And I mean, this is a guy that can score from anywhere on the field. This is a leader. This is a vocal leader, which I think is needed. The guys go, well, I'm a leader, but I lead by example. Okay, great. Get in line. You got to have a few vocal leaders that bring that fire to the huddle. And Nate Frazier is that guy. And so beyond the questionable depth, you mentioned the Robinsons and their past health issues, with the foot, or in the case of Rod, or whether we're talking about the knee with Branson. I do think it's a big lift, and probably one we haven't talked enough about. That Cash Jones is back. I mean, he's a tremendous third down back and just a great weapon in general. Anytime you got a back that come out of the backfield and make those kind of catches downfield, a la James Cook or Kenny McIntosh, that's special. I mean, it adds a dimension to the offense. So I think Cash Jones brings great value. But to your point, I am in complete agreement. I mean, the one guy the bell cow capable back, not that Georgia wants to make a living out of 25 carries a game for him, but a guy that you could hand it to 20 to 25 times that could have a 200-yard game in him is Nate Frazier. He could be the difference maker down the stretch.
And I know that all Georgia fans are hoping so. It gave us such a great glimpse of what he could be last season. Even with the fumbles, people were willing to forget and forgive because in the moments where he really shined, it was super bright and it gave Georgia fans a lot to look forward to.
I'd say Kaylee, let me interrupt. I would say the fans were willing to forgive and forget. I got a feeling that probably wasn't happening in the football building.
No.
Knowing Kirby and that staff, I don't think anybody's forgotten anything. I'm guessing Nate's probably had a little extra work on the ball security this offseason.
At the same time, though, it's like going into last season, did you really think that you were going to have to play a true freshman at running back? Probably not.
I mean, what they have 4 scholarship backs get injured at some. I mean, when you look at what the Georgia team did, I won't go too high on the soapbox, but when you look at what those guys accomplished, I just keep doubling down because I got to keep reminding, oh man, that's just such a tough season. You won the SEC against the most ridiculous schedule with everybody injured. Like literally everybody got hurt. Carson Beck got hurt. Every offensive lineman missed a week. Your top 2 receivers were suspended. You had 4 scholarship running backs down. Who was left? Bring the water boy in. I mean, this team, the defensive line at the start of the year, they didn't have a deep rotation. So it was just one injury after another. Even your punter got hurt. And yet you still won the SEC and arguably the most competitive year in league history. Mm-hmm. So I don't let one outlier game, one tragic laden outlier game skew what I watched in the regular season. Mm-hmm. And yes, they lost a lot, but there's so much to be said for the culture that Kirby's built that we just can't write them off. We can't go, well, they don't have a first round pick. Maybe this will be an off year. We're sitting here saying, no. They just don't have as much a margin for error. And that's why we're dialing down into these 4 key guys. I guess we kind of cheated a little bit on the quarterback saying position group. But other than that, 3 key guys with Nate Frazier and Christian Miller being 2 and 3, I'm dying to know who your 4 is.
I know we've got one more for you. And what's crazy is I remember sitting in this chair this time last year when there was a lot of negativity towards Dalen Everett. People were not impressed by the season that he had the year prior. And of all people, Dalen Everett ends up being the most consistent cornerback. Was it the Kentucky game where him and Julian Humphrey, who's no longer with the program, played every single snap of that game? And he had both of those tremendous performances against Texas when it really mattered most. On the opposite side of the field for the other cornerback position, there's going to be a battle that takes place, but at least you've got consistency with Dalen Everett, who's also going to bring a certain sense of leadership. He's a can't-miss player for the team because we don't know what's going to happen on the other side, but between him and KJ Bolden, I feel good about what Georgia has on that back end.
I do too. I think the secondary is in really good hands and really good shape, and I would agree. I count on Dalen being a cornerstone. He's so much of a can't miss that I'm not going to put him in a can't miss because I already know he's not going to miss. Mm-hmm. But I'll give to your 4A. I will present to you 4B, and that is CJ Allen. And this will be a 3rd year now that CJ's starting. Just being that Mike, being that voice, that Nakobe Dean, that Monty Rice. You really are the heartbeat and the pulse of that defense, and not just because you make the calls, not just because you make sure that everyone's properly aligned. Leadership, and CJ is that guy. When you watch CJ Allen get behind the podium and represent Georgia football, he's almost like a governor. I mean, there's a regal nature. This is a guy who grew up in Georgia in a small town that was so eager to want to represent and do things the right way and lead the right way and be that hard worker and be that stone wall in the running game if he can get just enough help from his defensive lineman to keep the blockers off him. I think CJ needs to have a special year. I think this linebacking core is very solid. I like the experience and I like the new talent, but I think it starts with CJ Allen. So you're going to go Everett. I get it. Cornerstone of the secondary, lockdown corner, take away the best receiver. I would agree with that. I like Allen a little bit more in the can't miss department just because he transcends the entire defense. It's not just his position. How he does, how he calls it, how he leads affects all 11 guys on the defense. So I'm going C.J. Allen. I think that's a good 4A and 4B. I think both of those guys really need to have good seasons.
Definitely more so the quarterbacks and the captains of the defense. I think that's where we find common ground in that. I think all this goes to say that this isn't the same flashy, shiny Georgia players that we saw last year or in the few years prior. As Mike mentioned, there might not be any first-round picks on this team, but in looking at this roster, we certainly know who the ones that can't miss are because they're going to make the most impact or they bring a certain element to the team that these younger guys just don't have because they haven't had enough time. And that's okay because you know that you've got these 4 to count on. In just a moment, we have got a very, very, very special interview here on The Beat. We'll get to it in just a second. For now, this is On The Beat presented by Ingalls.
It's the moment you dream of, the moment you work for, train for, run wind sprints when nobody's watching for, the moment when hours of gym time, court time, prep time, all culminate into this time. The moment when millions of bounces, blocks, and boards all add up to this, your moment. Ingalls, we're with you every step of the way.
So I am very excited to introduce that we have Georgia basketball coach Mike White here today on The Beat.
Well, as promised, we got Mike White here, Georgia basketball coach. Coach, obviously getting into a busy time right now, portal opening up. But before we look forward, I want to just take one look back. I mean, when Gonzaga flashed up there, everybody's thinking, oh my gosh, this is a program with 9 Sweet 16 appearances in a row, 26 straight. I mean, very comfortable in that arena against a Georgia team and making their first appearance in 10 years. And yet I kind of felt like he had a pretty good game plan. I mean, and I'll just recap it, but they lead the nation with 43.1 points in the paint per game. I'm looking down. Georgia outscores them 32-28. Okay, no easy twos, like shutting down the run game in football. Got to keep them off the free throw line. They hit 80%, third best in the country. Well, again, Georgia 21 free throw makes Gonzaga 11. You feeling pretty good about it. Point guard, this guy's number 2 in the country. He's the NCAA leader in assists. He had 8 assists, but he had 5 turnovers. He matched his season high. It's almost like boom, boom, boom in terms of the scout. I mean, you had to feel good about the defense that you had out there in terms of what you wanted to take away.
Yeah, what we wanted to take away. Yeah, Mike, it's funny. It sounds like you were sitting in on our staff meetings as we were prepping for those guys. We did a lot of good things. I know the final score doesn't indicate it. That obviously we got off to a really, really rough start. Had some empty possessions. We had some open looks that just didn't go. Felt pretty good about our looks early. I remember pumping up my fist and our staff doing the same thing to our guys after a couple of those, what we call A shots. They just didn't go.
Right.
And then they hit some contested threes. They did. And, they're better offensively than we are. It wasn't our best night. They deserved, to advance. They've got a heck of a thing going there with Coach Few. Got a lot of respect for their program and what they've accomplished and continue to accomplish. That said, though, I thought our guys did a really good job of locking in, protecting the paint, forcing skips, forcing in those short rolls. We wanted those bigs to fan it as opposed to playing isolations and getting to the rim and drawing fouls. As you said, they're so efficient at converting twos, but also converting from the foul line and force contested threes. And we did. They just made them. They just did. And a lot of times, obviously, good offense always beats good defense.
Yeah, 12 of 20 from 3. I mean, this is a team that was 1 of 15 in their previous game, and I think it was their second most prolific three-point shooting effort in an NCAA tournament under Few. Not that that's any consolation. It happens against your team, and also, no Georgia guys with more than 3 fouls. That was like another big thing because they got so many bigs. I'm like, I'm just going down the checklist. I'm going, hey, look, you guys are 5 of 26 shooting the 3. They're 12 of 20. I mean, like some nights you just and I know you guys worked hard in practice for the moment, but. Look, it is what it is. And as far as Gonzaga, I got to say this. I watched, and I'm sure you probably checked it out too when they played Houston. It looked like an NBA game out there. Everybody's above the rim. And I'm thinking, this just doesn't seem right. How is this an 8 seed? And I'm talking to Mike Mobley about it. He's like, there's only been one other team with a net and a top 10 metric in both Ken Pom and the net ranking. And that team went on to the Final Four as a 2021. So, I don't know who put Gonzaga there or why or what but that was not an 8 team. I'm just telling you, man, that Houston Gonzaga game looked like a Final Four matchup. So as we move forward,
You know what's funny, Mike?
What's that?
We lose the game. The clock's running out. I walk towards Mark, and you can ask Mark this in time if you see him in passing. And as we're shaking hands, I said, "How the hell were y'all an 8 seed?" And he started laughing. He said, "I know, we're pretty good, huh?" And, that said, though, them playing two bigs, I kind of, and them being a big brand name, and our guys instantly having that amount of respect for that program when the name pops up on the screen, I kind of like the matchup in that regard, that it would grab our guys' attention. And again, they play big. We struggled at times against defending teams that would really spread you with 4 and 5 out with us playing two bigs. That said, though, we also drew a team that was probably better than their seed.
For sure. And that was one of the things, in fact, I remember Bruce Pearl telling me when they survived that 2-point game at Stegman, he said, "Man, these guys defend the two as good as anybody in the league." And again, football analogy, that's like stopping the run.
Yeah.
You just don't want to give up those twos at the bucket. And Georgia was so good defending the two. And I know that's not a sexy thing in basketball, but it's such an important thing. It's probably what's going to lead to Houston, making a run, I would project. But I digress. Getting to Georgia basketball, and let's get the elephant out of the room. He was an elephant. Asa Newell, we know he's a one and done. I mean, this guy's projected, I think he's one of 6 SEC guys projected in the first round, all from SEC schools, none Kentucky, by the way. Again, credit Mike Mobley for those stats. He's the best stat guy in the business. But life after Asa, right? I mean, so I feel pretty good. I mean, I know we're in this free agent period of NIL, but
sure.
I look at Silas Demery Jr. and I hear a lot of we and what we're going to do in June, and I look at Blue Kane, and this is a guy that looks like he's a part of the landscape now. I mean, he's part of what has happened in the last 2 years, but then what? Like, what happens next for Georgia basketball?
Sure. All of these guys have options, just like all of our staff, year in and year out, and it is the current landscape, and you've got to adapt, and you've got to, as much as you preach loyalty and you want continuity, you want these guys to take advantage of their options every spring and do what's in their best interest. Hopefully that means that we've got a lot of retention, but we'll see. You can't guarantee anything. You go into this thing telling yourself as a staff, as a coach, that, you've got to have plans in place in case this guy may leave, or this guy could jump in the portal and test it and see what his market value is. That said, 1 through 5 positionally, we've got to be prepared, to recruit other guys. You just don't know. I do think that all of our guys had a great life experience this year. Love the University of Georgia, love Athens, love the community, and they were a big part of doing something special. We had a special year. Now, we want to have a more special year next year and the following, right, continuing to build. And we want this to be a launching pad, of course. We don't want to go to the NCAA tournament and come back quickly. We want to get back and be better, right? And so we've got guys that we like that had a really good year, and we were, at the same time, we were very youthful teams. And so Ace has got to make a really tough decision too. I think that he's going to be heavily pursued, as he should be. I absolutely love Asa Newell. If I'm any team in the NBA, I'm doing whatever I've got to do to take a swing at it. And so these other guys with their portal decisions, we'll see. It'll all play out here in the next couple of weeks, the next 3-4 weeks, for sure. At the end of the day, I do think even if you lose a guy or 2 or 3, who knows, I still think we could have as much continuity as just about any team in our league. And I think you've got a league full of senior-laden teams. I mean, there's going to be teams in our league that lose 8 seniors, 6 seniors, 5 seniors. We lose 2 seniors. So at the end of the day, if we have as much continuity, I'm hopeful for, even if you lose a lottery pick / first-round type guy, I like that we can be older. We can be older and have perhaps the most continuity we've had in this rebuild effort here at Georgia.
Well, it's saying a mouthful, and I got to double down when we talk about the special year. You got to talk about the culture. 15 wins in Stegman. That's a program record. I mean, the metrics. 20 of the 33 teams you played were in the NCAA tournament. You played like 18 top. I mean, the schedule was unbelievable. So the fact that you did it amid this record-breaking landscape now, and we saw 14 SEC teams make the tournament. It just crushes the previous record of 11 by the Big East in 2011. You see 7 teams still standing in the Sweet 16, another record for the SEC. But it just means more, right? But they're paying more. These players, this isn't happening for free. We're seeing the as yourself included, the better coaches at the universities. A lot of these players that are transfers, I look at Florida, 4 of their 5 players in the starting lineup started their career somewhere else. I mean, those guys didn't come for free. They didn't come for the sun. Now Georgia, I understand, Georgia's in a more competitive position in this way. And yet still, we dial it back behind those dollars. We talk about the culture. And I think the thing I'm going to remember is at one point you all had lost 9 of 11 games. Now, look a little closer, and 6 of those games were to top 10 teams on the road. Yep. Like you said, what does that mean? We're the 11th. We could be the 11th best team, and that be the case. But how do you maintain a culture and a belief where you can finish the season on a 4-game win streak against other bubble teams and Florida right now, which looks like the conference, the tournament favorite? How do you maintain a culture? How do you build a culture seemingly out of thin air with some new blood coming in, new players, freshmen, transfers, and yet here we had this team that was, just showed incredible resolve to make the field?
Sure. I mean, great question, Mike. Culture is action, right? And it's how you carry yourself. It's how you respond to your teammates. Coaching, it's how you respond to positives, to negatives. It's how you get along, with your teammate, with your staff, with your support staff, your work ethic. It's all action. I think at the end of the day, buy-in is a big piece too, right? And so whatever any of us as coaching staffs are preaching to our team, to our young people, the next step is for your guys, starting with the leadership of that team, whether or not they're going to buy in or not, and hold each other accountable to that. And for us, it was growth. It was simply one day at a time. Let's get better. One practice, one film session, one weight session at a time. Growth, growth, growth. And we're going to continue for that to be our mantra here in this program moving forward. But RJ Godfrey, Asa Newell, Justin Abson, Blue Kane, Silas Demery, Dylan James, the 2 seniors that came back, Greater Atlanta in Tyron Lawrence and Dakota LaFew decided to finish their careers at Georgia and wear the G. They embraced that growth mantra. They bought into it. They preached it, and they lived it. It was action. And so that focus on simply getting better helped us through the positives and some of the big wins, especially early on where you beat a St. John's and you come home and you got some mid-major teams that you got to prepare for. Let's get better today. Let's get better today. Let's not rest on our laurels. Huge win. Let's celebrate it for a week. It helped in that regard, but it helped more in the regard, like you talked about, Mike, the 4-game losing streaks, just continuing to work and worry about things that we could control. And that's how we practiced our attitude and effort every day.
Yeah. The thought just crossed my mind. You lose to Oklahoma and you say, you know what, that's our worst year. That's our worst loss of the year. They were 43 in the net, right? You take Calipari and Arkansas down to the wire at Arkansas. They're standing here in the Sweet 16 and I play the game. What if Georgia had been the 10 in that bracket? I know that's a dangerous thing to do, but I'm thinking, what if that was Georgia that got that watered down Kansas and got to play St. John? But point being is that what the end product that you had, it was significant. It was fabulous. What I want to delve a little bit deeper into, and I can't help but think about it because I got to see you play. I'm old enough to say I was covering the SEC in basketball when you were a player at Ole Miss and a point guard and, dribbling out the clock on the Rebels' first ever NCAA tournament win and taking them to the tournaments. Is the guy that we're seeing coaching now, are you the same guy? Because, the thing I noted, a lot of the coaches I've covered or even seen, these guys are like, they're spitting fire. Turn the courtside microphone off, man. You really don't want to hear what they're saying. But you and Mark Few are just like 2 of those guys that how are they? And almost, what? Number one, is this the Mike White that played point guard for Ole Miss? Is this how he was with his teammates? Was it the same leadership style? And number 2, has this whole NIL transfer thing, maybe the nice guys have a little bit of an advantage. They don't hurt quite as many feelings. They don't use exactly the same language. Maybe this is a good thing that we get the Boy Scout. And I say that in a positive way because I think Mark Few, I've seen his practices. He's the same way. I mean, he is one cool cat.
He's a heck of a coach. He's had an amazing run, and will continue to do so. I internalize a lot, Mike. I do. I'm as competitive as anyone that I know. I've adapted though too. I have. I was a little bit different coaching those guys at Louisiana Tech. I think that they would tell you that when they see me these days, and probably even earlier on at Florida. But I try to use a little bit more thought and intellect over emotion, as opposed to the way that I responded to positives and negatives at 18 to 22 years old, which was 99% emotion.
So a lot more emotion at Ole Miss as a player. But Mike, the guys tell me that you still jump into drills every now and then. They say Coach will, when he turns his hat around backwards, I guess sometimes you like to make a few shots. He gets a little competitive out there with the players.
I've just had enough time. You know, I've always been a hat wearer. Probably because I was forced to wear a uniform in high school, Jesuit high school, you know, with the name tags and the patent leather boots and all of that, you know, and the khaki uniform and the web belt. And if not, you got 45 minutes of penance all after school. And it was almost rebellious for me. Now I can wear a hat. I'm going to wear a damn hat, even though it's a little bit different because you're in a gym, but also a little bit light averse. You know, you're under the bright lights in the court the whole day. And I've had enough times though where you jump in a drill and you grab a basketball and you go to make a pass or you go to make a shot and you flip your hat by accident. And so yeah, you jump in a drill. Now you turn it backwards and it's out of the way, right? So now you can model what you're trying to teach a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. So that's when the guys know that it's going to be on. It sounds like a lot of fun ahead. As far as the schedule goes, Mike, when do the guys start? I know they have off-season conditioning at some point. Silas kept talking about June 1st.
Yeah. You know, June 1st is a date that we talk a lot about, you know, especially late in the year. Guys, we've been at this since June 1st, right? Whatever day that was. I don't know if it was the 4th or the 3rd, you know, whenever those workouts started, it's early June when that first summer session starts. And that's when we'll be back at it again this summer ahead of us. But that's a date that, you know, we used as a reference point a lot. And we'll do when I figure out what that date is. I need to probably ask today. Because that's when we're back at it, you know, and that's when that next 10-month season ends. It's incredible. You think about college basketball and the average fan, if you were to ask a person on the street, how long is college basketball season? 4 or 5 months. It's 10 months. If you go June 1 to right now, basically you're talking 2 months where you regroup a little bit. And for coaches, it's crazy because we've had the lack of dead periods that now we have. You know, football had it figured out a long time ago, but I've been doing this for 20-something years now without literally a dead period until this year, where you can take 4 or 5 days and you're not allowed to have recruits on campus, nor are you allowed to go on the road and recruit, which is much needed for our sport.
No doubt. When we look at a characteristic, I guess two questions here. One, as you build Georgia in the future, every coach has his staples, right? And I've heard so much about your ball screen defense, but then this year you trot out this 1-3-1 that had Pearl perplexed and even Florida struggled with at times. I mean, do you have a concept or a framework of what a Mike White team is supposed to look like? One, I suppose that's kind of I know talent has a lot to do with that, but do you have kind of a concept of what it looks like for Georgia basketball in terms of what your team staples, what you want them to be?
I think it starts with defense and rebounding. And I know that in recruiting, that's not the first thing guys want to hear. I'm just honestly answering your question, Mike. If you go back and look at the metrics from the day I got the head job at Louisiana Tech, we've made that a point of emphasis every day. It starts with those two things, the three major areas of the game: defense, rebounding, and offense, of course. And then you've got the special areas. Those two of the three are easier to control, based on effort, on character, on connectivity, on some toughness, and defense and rebounding travel. They give you a chance, whether you're making shots or not, to be competitive in that game. And then offensively, I'm open to playing different ways. We've played a bunch of different ways over the years. We've played 4-around-1, and we've done some 5-out. We've been extremely ball screen heavy. We've had a couple years. We were shorthanded one year, maybe year 3 at Florida, where we were down to 6 or 7 guys at the end of the year, and we were playing late clock, set-oriented offense. You recruit the best you can. We want to have high character guys that are selfless to a certain extent, that are good teammates. We're going to have a healthy locker room, and then you figure it out offensively. You do. I wish it would be a luxury to know we've got our entire team returning and you know exactly what you're going to do offensively. But at the end of the day, that it's just not realistic. We're going to get the best players that we can get this spring to add to who's going to return. And then we've just got to figure it out. And whether that means we play incredibly fast or somewhat fast or in the middle, we're set heavy, we're ball screen heavy, we're screens off the ball heavy. We're willing to go through a trial and error process and experiment a little bit in the fall and figure out what's best for us. We morphed a few times this year and then figured it out there as we made our run again in playing the best basketball of the season. For us, late in the season, we kind of figured out 2 or 3 different things that were giving us success, and we rode those things late. And I think our guards, certainly starting with Silas Demery, really benefited down the stretch.
Yeah, I think he averaged like 19 points in the last 5 or 6, something ridiculous like that. He was off the hook. Mike, I know that it's probably still a little bit in the moment. I mean, your plane didn't land that long ago. I mean, we were out in Wichita just a few days ago, it seems like. But when you reflect on the season, right, and I know that you got a whole offseason to reflect, not that coaches spend much time in the rearview mirror, but at this moment, what stands out about this season? I mean, obviously getting to the NCAA tournament for the first time in 10 years. I mean, the program record wins at Stegman Coliseum, beating 3 conference tourney champs in Florida, Grand Canyon, St. John's. I mean, I could go down the bullet point list. There seems so many of them, but what stands out? What's carrying you in your mind right now about this team? I know how much you loved them.
Yeah, special group. Mike, I'd be lying to you if I didn't tell you that I still had a bad taste in my mouth and that I was still a little bit down about the way we played and the way it finished. Just being honest. And you're sitting here and sometimes when you're watching these games on TV as a coach and you've been knocked out, it's a little bit easier to watch, at least that you were part of it. You know,
right.
When you're not a part of the NCAA tournament, it's really hard to watch, but you still watch it for educational purposes. But sometimes you're watching and you just get a little bit angry, like, damn, I wish we would have made this shot or forced this guy to bounce at one time and not gotten off to the start we got off to. We would have had maybe we'd still be playing, and what could we do against this team? But then, I've got to tell myself, like you tell your team, perspective, right? Let's look back and look at, if you asked me last June, if you could accomplish what you accomplished, would you feel good about the step that you've made and the step that the program has made? Absolutely. Are you kidding me? All the things these guys accomplished, we broke a bunch of records, we ended a lot of streaks, we started some streaks, but most importantly, we talked about the culture that was instilled this year and that was acted upon by these young guys, and the amount of adversity, how resilient that these guys overcame, and how resilient that they were to finish as strong as we did is about as rewarding a late season run as I've been a part of as a head coach. I'll always look back on this group and remember that we lost 9 of 11, but in June, perhaps June 1, who knows, we literally started at that point talking about how difficult our schedule was going to be. And guys, you have no idea, like, there's a chance we lose. I promise you, there's a chance we lose 3 or 4 in a row at some point during the season. And a couple guys look at you like, Coach, you shouldn't be saying that. No, that's potentially that could happen. It could happen to maybe every team in our league, how good our league is this year. It happened to most teams in our league, right?
Auburn.
Maybe
Auburn was 3 out of 4, I think. Yeah,
right. So
one team in the country.
So how do you have a strong enough culture where you can overcome that? And we can talk honestly about each other and give each other hard truths and focus on getting better and the bigger picture and all of those things. And these guys bought into it, and we can always reference this team moving forward. Really proud of this group. Loved coaching these guys.
Well, and in fairness, when you reached the top 25 for the first time in, 12, 13 years, you were saying the same thing. Hey, don't get too high. Can't get too high. Can't get too low. So, I mean, you guys rolled in the top. I think you beat a top 5 team for the first time since 03. I mean, there were a lot of opportunities where this team could have hit complacency had they gotten complacent after a win over Florida. right?
Sure.
Or had they read their own headlines in January when you guys broke into the top 25 for the first time in 12 years and beat Kentucky? Another one of those teams, Stan, sorry, not to make you mad, because I know you're looking, we beat that team. We beat that team. We beat that team. Yes, you did. You beat some great teams, but I thought you captured it well, Mike, and I'll say it. I mean, you guys changed the narrative. And, to me, that's what you were hired to do 3 years ago. And that's some heavy lifting, man. I mean, let's face it. Georgia basketball tradition going back 118 years. But, like you told us then, hey, this is now. That doesn't matter. This is your guys now, and you put the ball in their hands. And here we are. So I guess I would just congratulate you, and I hope I get to visit with you a little bit more. You obviously have a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of SEC basketball teams left in it, and I'd love to pick your brain a little later. But we really appreciate you joining us on DawgNation. I know the Georgia fan base, they got to be a part of March Madness. I was excited in full admission, I was excited about the NIT run. I'm like, oh, that's Xavier. They've never lost in the first round. Oh, he's going to Wake Forest. He's playing Steve Forbes. They've only lost one all year. Oh, they're going to Ohio State. They're going to pack it out. They're still pissed off about the Peach Bowl. I mean, to me, that was like, hey, that's something. Like, I saw something there. And those guys carried it over. And, man, just a great job. So congratulations. And, again, I really enjoyed it
so much, Mike. Yeah.
All right. Well, I know you got to get at it. It'd be interesting what this roster looks like in 3 or 4 months. Hopefully, you keep all the guys you want to keep.
Back on the phone.
You got it. Appreciate it, Mike White. Back to you, Kaylee.
And once again, we want to thank Mike White for joining us here today on All the Beat. In just a moment, we'll bring Mike back on. But first, we want to give a shout out to Daytona Beach. You're at the point where you're starting to plan your spring break vacations or your summer vacations, and don't hesitate to look somewhere that's really, really, really close to the state of Georgia, and that's Daytona Beach. 23 miles of Atlantic shoreline, and it's so much more than just laying out by the beach. You can kayak, you can surf, you can hike, you can play golf, and it's got really, really easy access. If you're in the state of Georgia, you can just make that drive. If you're a little bit further away, you can fly directly into the Daytona Beach International Airport. Now is a great time to score amazing deals on a coastal accommodations, and you can do that by visiting DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. That's DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. So, Mike, obviously we just got the chance to listen to you talk to Mike White, and I think, at least for me, after the loss to Gonzaga, my mind kind of goes, well, is this the end for Georgia's basketball run, or is this just the beginning? And I think that's something that Mike White hit on really well, is that this is a launch pad for something more. There are various players that can decide to come back, and a lot of these teams that we see now that end up being so successful in the tournament are the ones that typically have an older roster, just like Gonzaga, who had 5 upperclassmen starting. So at least for me, what I saw from the Dogs basketball team this season and what Mike White has been able to do, I've got high hopes for what the future holds for them.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, I think the most important thing was changing the culture. And I've seen this act before. When I was at Tennessee, Bruce Pearl, had some success his first season. And that culture, albeit a little bit more of a basketball school with more tradition, had been down, had been suffering. And someone needed to come in there and infuse some energy and change the culture and turn it into a winning culture. There's different expectations now for Georgia basketball. Now, I think it's fair to say we're going to expect them to go to the NCAA tournament next year. We're going to expect the Dogs to be in the hunt. We've seen them beat Titan programs. We saw them beat Florida, which, right now, to me, looks as good as anybody to win a national title. We saw them beat St. John's, which won the Big East Conference tournament. We saw them beat, another conference tournament champion. Play Auburn, within a bucket. They continue to dominate Georgia Tech in basketball. Everybody takes that for granted. That's a big deal. So we saw a lot of really good things in the results for Georgia. But I think the culture, to me, that Mike has brought is probably the most important thing, because that is what draws more talent. And the way Mike coaches, we were kidding with him a little bit. I called him a bit of a Boy Scout because I think he's a very clean and conscientious. When he's in practices, he just doesn't hammer those guys down and have that ugly, tone that I've seen from so many great coaches, by the way. Not going to mention any in other sports, but I'm just saying, Mike has a very calm demeanor, and I think players in today's age, especially, are drawn to that. And yet they know he was a baller. They know he was a 4-year starter at point guard that led Ole Miss into the NCAA tournament and got that historic win. So they know he's been there and done it, like Kirby, right? And he's coached it a long time, at La Tech and then Florida. He's been to an Elite Eight. He's beat Mark Few and Gonzaga when he was at Florida. You're not going to lose because of the X's and O's. And now the disposition, I believe, helps him recruit even more players, especially, if Georgia comes up with the kind of funding. I mean, let's face it, at the end of the game, different programs have different budgets. I think Georgia's probably somewhere in the middle, I would guess, on the budget.
Well, maybe after this year and seeing what a good basketball culture does for a school, they'll re-look into that and say, maybe we can find a way to squeeze a little more in.
Maybe Ant-Man. Hey, maybe Ant-Man's about due for his second contract, and he says, "You know what? I want to talk a little trash about my Georgia Bull." Maybe Anthony Ant-Man Edwards, but because I do wonder sometimes.
I know, see that out of him too.
When Draymond Green got a big contract with the Warriors, I just kind of thought, that's interesting. There's some new building going on in the basketball facility at Michigan State. These alums, they're in position to do that, and it's how do they value their program? And again, I know Ant-Man left here with a great taste, albeit it was a COVID year, and we never really got to see the end of that story. There was you thought to yourself, man, these guys, when Ant-Man's on, you just never really know what would have happened in that SEC tournament. But now you got Asa Newell that looks like a first-round pick, and his family loves Georgia so much, with his grandmother having worked in the president's office and him going to preschool right across the street from Stegman Coliseum. You had a future first-round NBA draft pick growing up right there in Athens in preschool, taking his first steps. So it's hard to say, Kaylee, what's going to happen with the NIL funding and how many outside deals kids can get. I mean, that's so much of that is up in the air with this third party, Deloitte serving as a clearinghouse. And I don't want to get too heavy into the weeds, but there's still a lot of unknowns. But what we do know is that Josh Brooks has made a conscientious decision to be competitive in every sport. And he stood behind Mike White this year. He knew what he had in Mike. And I think the Bulldogs proved down the stretch that was a great hire. And I think the future looks really bright. Mike was in a pretty good move. It's first day of transfer portal opening, and he seemed awful cheery to me. I'll just say that. Did he not seem like he might have had a little, might know something we don't know? I'll just say that.
My woman intuition body language radar was going off. It's funny because you talk about Ant. And what comes to my mind is when the Pony Express thing happened, they said that the reason that people were giving money to SMU was because they were tired of hearing their coworkers brag about the success of the other teams in the state of Texas. That definitely seems like something Ant would do, would give money to the program so he could stop listening to his coworkers talk about it. Anyway, okay, so refocus back into, there's still so many games left to play, including some that will be played in Atlanta this weekend. They will host a Sweet 16 and an Elite 8 game. 7 teams remain. Which, I'm not asking necessarily who do you think is going to win, but out of all the SEC teams that are left, which one has the easiest path? Because Georgia clearly didn't get an easy path. So which SEC team has the easiest path to the championship?
I kind of like Florida's bracket. Now, they had to survive UConn. They had to survive the two-time defending champion and a gritty win. And, you give Golden a lot of credit and the Gators, but you look at what's ahead now. Maryland and Texas Tech, I think, are the two teams we're kind of projecting to maybe stand in the way. And perhaps they could end up seeing Auburn. I mean, that's not going to be easy, obviously, if they they're on the same side of the bracket. But I like Florida right now. If I could redo my bracket picks, I think I would probably still have Houston. I would probably have Houston and Florida playing. I think that's right. But I would say Florida has the easiest path right now, Kaylee, to a national among the SEC teams. I mean, I look at Alabama; they got BYU and Duke ahead of them. BYU is scoring points in bunches right now, and Duke is the only ACC team left, but they're still Duke. You look at Tennessee and Kentucky; they got to kind of run into each other a little bit there. You kind of wonder what's going to happen there. So I'm going to go with the Gators. I would say they have the easiest path. What are your thoughts on that?
Now I'm looking at my bracket. I got to pull it up right here. I'm paying attention. I think you might be onto something because with the way that Duke handled the first 2 rounds, that's not the team that I want to run into the Elite 8 or Final 4. So for Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, I mean, essentially they all have to kind of take each other out before they get to that point. But I know Auburn's overall number 1 seed, but if I'm Florida, I would much rather play Auburn because I'm familiar with their game. I know what it's like to play them, and at this point I know how to beat them, as opposed to a Duke team that is highly ranked, and you've only seen them play on the TV. So I think I'm with you on this one. I would say Florida, but I think what's crazy to me is just no major upsets. The fact that there was still a perfect bracket remaining yesterday, like, that hasn't happened in quite a few years where anybody's ever made it out of the first round. So really, all of the high-level teams made it through this year, and I think that's because all of the SEC teams came in so highly ranked. They were so battle-tested, and that prevented the Cinderellas that we typically see from happening.
Well, and interesting enough, as I talk about the Florida Gators, I said, if you look a little bit closer at the Florida Gators, Kaylee, they're Cinderellas. They've got 4 of their 5 starters that started in smaller programs, Ionas and Marshalls and Belmonts. I mean, so the Gator at Florida Atlantic, I mean, you look at it's like, well, now, wait a minute. These guys all started, so they could be on Cinderellas somewhere else. But now, because of NIL, these basketball programs are able to hoard the top level talent. It's not like football, right? You only got to have 5 guys on the floor, but you got 8 or 9 or 10 in your rotation playing pretty. That's more than half your roster. Football is completely different. So kind of the opposite in effect, right? We talk about college football and how that parity allows a 5 and a 6 seed. Ohio State team finished 4th in their conference for that matter, play for a national title. But in basketball, it's almost just the opposite, where the strong power conference teams with the money are able to pluck these guys and build these seemingly super teams. But again, you look a little deeper and you're like, wow, there's a lot of transfers on that team, isn't there? It's like, oh yeah, they'd be somewhere else right now. I think Ole Miss might have one of the Butler guys too. So gosh, if Butler had this guy from Florida and Ole Miss, they're like, wait a minute, we'd be pretty good. We could be in the Sweet. Well, yeah, but you can't pay him. So here we are right now. Cinderella goes by the wayside. I can't believe we're putting John Calipari and Cinderella in the same sentence, especially when he's the last SEC coach, Kaylee, to win a national championship 13 years ago. So this is going to be big to see if the SEC can finish this thing out.
Well, Georgia may not get a win in basketball. Florida may be on the upper hand in basketball. But you know what? The Diamond Dawgs sweep Florida this weekend.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet for Georgia. I mean, I think it had been, 19 years since they won a series in Gainesville or something like that. And, talking to transfers, I know the issue had been the starting pitching, which they clearly solved in Gainesville at least. But Brian Curley, the closer they have, I mean, here's a VCU transfer to Georgia. I think Georgia's got, I want to say 23 transfers on their roster, 18 from 18 different schools, including a couple in the SEC. So, I know that the transfer thing, kind of, sticks in the craw of some people, but it's enabled Georgia basketball and Georgia baseball to make some pretty quick turnarounds with their capable coaches. And Kirby's doing what he can, to keep his talented personnel. It doesn't seem to be bothering him too much on the recruiting trail among freshmen. But it is interesting dynamic to see what Wes Johnson, the Wizard, as he's known by his players, and nickname I'm not going to let go. One of the pitchers said, Coach said he doesn't have all the answers, but we think he does. We call him the Wizard. And I said, you know what? I like it. Because here's a throwback old school coach with great relations, but his ability to dissect these metrics, Kaylee, and his time in Major League Baseball with the Twins, it's not just studying your pitchers, it's studying the hitters and the gaps in their, their swing zones, and, that scout that Wes can give them from that level. Just a brilliant hire by Josh Brooks, and certainly Foley Field right now is just electric and on fire. And if you haven't been there in a minute, it's going to look a little different. They got the field turf, pitcher's best friend, some true bounces, less errors kind of deal, and then a little bit more seating as well. So it's a great time for Georgia baseball. You got to tip your cap to Wes Johnson, and certainly seeing that pitching come to fruition. It is a long season. Got to keep those guys healthy and got to continue to develop the other arms on that team.
Before we wrap up, want to give one last shout out to the Finnish Long Drink. I say it every week, and I'm not lying when I say it. I did have one on Saturday as I'm sitting there watching March Madness games. And we keep encouraging you to do it, but it really is the time to try one. And if you don't know where you can locate them, the Long Drink makes it really easy for you to find the nearest one to you. All you need to is go to thelongdrink.com, and in the top corner, there's going to be a search bar. and you can put the city that you live in, or you can put the zip code, and it'll tell you the nearest store where you can pick up the long drink, or whether you're visiting your favorite dive bar or wherever it is you like to drink outside the house. Just ask. I'm telling you, so many more places have picked up having the long drink at their bars. So just ask, see if they have one for everybody, whether it's the original blue can, it's the zero sugar white can, the flavored ones like the cranberry or the peach. Jeff Santel keeps telling me that there's a pineapple one. I'm not going to believe it till I see it, because that would be my absolute dream. Or if you want something a little bit on the stronger side, make sure you try the black one. So to find out where you can find the nearest finished long drink to you, go visit thelongdrink.com. Again, that's thelongdrink.com. Once again, I am Kaylee Mansell with Mike Griffith. This has been another wonderful episode of On the Beat. Thank you all so much for joining, and we'll see you next Monday at 7 o'clock.